Hello, everybody. I'm George Greenley, Head of Training at the Rain Alliance. I'm standing in today for Gwen Volpe, who was to lead this panelist discussion. I'd like to thank you all for joining today's webinar, which we've titled Real-World Insights, Future Frontiers, and Opportunities for Solution Providers in the Healthcare Market. This is a heady title to live up to, but we have an excellent team with us today who work at the coalface of healthcare in the USA and will help us unpack that title and understand what's happening in that market and where the opportunities lie. But first, I would like to introduce you to our panelists, starting with Ruby Zinat from the University of Florida Health Shands Hospital, where Ruby is the pharmacist coordinator for adult medicine inpatient pharmacy services. We also have with us today Anthony Scott, the Director of Pharmacy Operations and Account Management at Cardinal Health. And finally, we have David Aguero from St. Jude Children's Hospital, Research Hospital, where he's the Director of Medication Systems and Informatics. And if that's not enough, he's also the Program Director for PGY2 Pharmacy Informatics. I had to look that one up. I think it stands for Postgraduate Year 2 Studies. So we're going to start with a discussion amongst the panelists, and then we'll come to your questions. But I urge you to really take advantage of the fact that we have our end users here today and who have practical experience in using RAIN RFID and the problems that RAIN RFID can solve for the healthcare industry. So make use of it, ask the questions. We'll come to the questions at the end of the webinar, but you can ask questions based on what we're talking about or other areas that we have not talked about, in which case, if we can't answer the questions for you, we'll try and find answers later on and bring them back to you. So let's kick off with an observation from last week's RAIN Alliance annual meeting of members, where we learned that our industry has reached 52 billion tag shipments per year. That's just an incredible 1 billion tag shipments per week. Now, clearly, the retail mandates and the broadening of the retail mandates into other product sets is driving that to a significant degree. But also from the statistics that were presented by Aileen, we can see that healthcare is becoming a major growth area for the RAIN industry. We will get to the use cases that's driving that in a minute, but I'd like to start with a sort of business operational perspective. Ruby, I wonder, could you give us some insight into the business operational pain points associated with resource constraints and labor shortages?
Sure. So at our institution, especially as we are, as our system continues to grow and expand, our inpatient pharmacy services department is absorbing a lot more volume in terms of the areas that we're servicing. And we're constantly having to adjust workflows, adapt to changes. And so our labor is definitely a bottleneck factor in terms of our workflow. And so this is all the more reason for us to seek more automated and efficient technologies. And so basically for us, the growing of our system is increasing our service area and our need to really make sure that our workflows are efficient and that our technologies are helping us achieve that.
Okay. Anthony, could you give us a perspective on cost and financial issues that are impacting the influence of technology adoption?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Again, thanks for joining. I think a lot of the financial pressures and cost constraints around any new technology from a perception perspective can always be that first hurdle as you're thinking about, well, this is new. How much is it going to cost me? And, what am I going to get from it? So I think as you think about some of the ROI and some of the initial capital investments needed for either utilization or purchasing tags or getting medications or products or supplies from a manufacturer that's already adding tags and having to pay for that, paying for the equipment, IT or IS integration needs, like Ruby mentioned, labor and what kind of staffing are you going to have to put behind the resource to make it efficient and make it useful from an operational and from a clinical perspective. Those are all pressures that are the reality for many departments in the healthcare setting, and you have to be able not to just be able to articulate those well, but to be able to figure out ways to overcome them. And so, I think a lot of the financial pressures and cost constraints there really can impact technology adoption, not just for the rate of adoption, but also the success of the adoption as well. We'll talk about some examples probably later on, but if you look at utilization and being able to either do a pilot or figure out how to start small and grow and scale, really overcoming some of those financial hurdles up front to get approvals, get buy-in, go through all of your initial setups, and then being able to sustain some of those operational needs related to the use of RFID can be a challenge. And so, it's good to be able to understand what that looks like from an outlook perspective. It's good to be able to engage in those kind of discussions with any potential vendors that you're going to be working with as you kind of map that out, and also thinking about what those pressures and costs are going to be, not just from a short-term perspective, but from a long-term perspective as well.
Okay. Interesting. And David, your perspective from IT, in healthcare and the constraints within IT and healthcare that it might be driving adoption of RAIN.
So I think some of what Ruby and Tony spoke to is universal. The reality is cost containment. It is the season of cost containment in U.S. healthcare. So am I getting the most out of my contracts by leveraging economy of scale? Any way that I can use a vendor or a partner of vendors in their portfolios appropriately and get the best contracting deal out of that is going to be important from an IS perspective. Now, that being said, visibility for inventory management and getting that within pharmacy is huge. That's important from an IS perspective as well, because, frankly, knowing where our assets are and redeploying those assets is just as important from a cost containment perspective. To that point, the staff to Tony's point, the staff to implement these products, that's a huge cost. And so asking us where we can redeploy staff, both in implementation as well as in support, is going to be important. In implementation, in terms of getting the best contract, and in deployment, in terms of being able to assure that the tag is encoded as far away from the point of care as possible, because we don't want to use our staff to encode those tags. But I think we'll talk about that a bit later.
Yeah.
And the last thing that I want to point out that I hadn't really thought about until this morning. So we're working with an RFID vendor that had AI in its name. And so from a contracting perspective, when you take a contract to your legal department as a health system, if AI is considered anywhere, it is honestly going to slow the process down as you as an organization seek to contain any risk and understand the contract.
That's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought of that, even if it's in the name. Yeah, okay, I get it. Just throw this out to anyone who wants to pick it up, but are there regulatory requirements as well around RAIN RFID adoption and the impact of that on the business?
So I think from my perspective, and y'all let me know if you disagree, I don't think it's so much about hardwire meeting requirements that exist today as it is about creatively meeting needs. The Axia Institute had the pilot related to Drug Supply Chain Security Act, where many of us are aware of the work that they did in proof of concept of seeing the pedigree of the product through the supply chain. There's still more work to be done there, but DSCSA is a huge pain point in pharmacy. I guarantee you, all three of our organizations are continuing to work to figure out that particular regulation in the most patient-centered way possible. But that's my opinion. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, from a regulatory compliance perspective, even not just DSCSA, but we're thinking about it from also med safety lens and a few other things that are kind of important from a safety and risk management perspective. Those are all good angles to be considerate of, but also be understanding how those applications can apply there. And I can also resonate with your comments around the use of the words artificial intelligence and how that may be kind of taken in with a grain of salt. It seems to be a very polarizing topic now, where you're either all in or you're like, we're not ready for that. That's something that's too far future for us. We're not quite ready to kind of cross that bridge. So it can definitely make or break your integration opportunities utilizing that kind of language in there. But I definitely agree with that perspective as well.
Okay. Let's bring this down to something a little bit more concrete and talk about some use cases. Ruby, could you share some examples with us from your facility, and particularly your home hospital at home program?
Yes, absolutely. So in addition to our regular code tray emergency kits that we make for our hospital on the inpatient side, something unique that we do is we make emergency medication kits for our nurses who are deployed to patient homes for our hospital at home program. So for those who are not familiar, hospital at home is a unique care model where patients are treated as inpatient, but from the comfort of their own homes. And so this requires a lot of coordination between nursing, physicians, case management, and pharmacy. And so our hospital and patient pharmacy services department is responsible for preparing these medications for these patients at home. And part of this care model includes a twice daily nurse visit. And so each nurse who is reporting to these patients' homes, they have these emergency med kits. Formulary inside these kits include Benadryl tablets or Zofran injectable, just anything that patients might need unexpectedly while the nurse is in the home. And so we've been using RFID technology to create these kits and to replenish them and restock them in real time. And so that's been our most recent use case for RFID. And it's proven to be a very efficient way for us to also communicate with nursing and be able to make sure we're replenishing these medications as needed.
Okay, interesting. Excuse me. Excuse me. Anthony, I think you have a similar use case with the medication kits. Would you like to walk us through this?
Yeah, a lot of our initial utilizations and rollout on the pharmacy side were within the procedural areas. I think one of the reasons that we identified that location was there was some good multidisciplinary engagement, and there was a lot of opportunities for efficiency around inventory management, having better controls around medication safety, better visibility, waste reduction, and also thinking about ways to support improving workflows and par levels for things that are used quite frequently, mostly on the medication side, but even on the supply chain side. So we had about a 24, 25 bed procedural area. And so we utilize RFID with manual tagging applied at the site of care within the satellite pharmacy to track all the medications used in our anesthesia kits and trays, all of our drug boxes, all of our specialty kits, cardiac case kits, pediatric case kits, orthopedic case kits, whatever it may be, to try to do a better job of not just understanding the medication logistics between different cases, but have a lot better visibility into what was used and distribution, charges, utilization, the whole nine within the procedural area. So that took a lot of engagement with our surgeons and providers, our nurse managers, our pharmacy staff who are working within the satellite space to segregate inventory and set up the analytics and set up the workflows from the dashboards and the readers and the tag application process, the safety checks, all the above. And so we had some really good success with that. We were able to not only get better visibility into medication utilization, but looked at opportunities for efficiency. Theoretically, we did some good avoidance from a med safety perspective in terms of making sure the right drugs in the right place at the right time and avoiding any issues when it comes to availability or safety checks. So we're very happy with that. And that was a pretty good success story to be able to not just have that foundation in the procedure area, but also potentially look for expansions and opportunities within the department to utilize RFID in more creative and more expansive ways. So that was our foray into that a few years ago.
The interesting thing of what you're saying about there is the number of different people that were involved in the project to make it successful, which we'll come back to in a little while. But are there any concrete results you can share with us out of that usage, or?
Yeah, I mean, we did a great job in reductions of PARs, I think, across our different medication tray types and utilization types. Depending on the site of care, I think we had about a 20 to 30% reduction in PAR level. So theoretically, that's avoiding waste, and you can use that inventory in other areas to improve your throughput. I think one of the best things about it was if we had a medication recall or something had to come back, I could run a report and I could see exactly where those drugs were that had the matching lot and expiration number, and I could have my staff go pull them immediately without having to go through everything manually. So that helps that process quite a bit to be efficient. The providers enjoyed it in terms of, they always knew they had the right quantity and the right drugs in the spots within their designated locations, within the kits and trays. It helped us a lot more with visibility into utilization and being able to reconcile charges as well. Once we went live with our updated EHR, that process became a little bit better. But our previous EHR, we were doing manual reconciliation for medication charges for the things that were administered during the cases. And so being able to run a report by the room number and location really makes that process a lot more efficient. So that was a win-win there as well. So those are some of the high level benefits that we felt like we were able to realize in real time.
And do you restrict this to just high value drugs or for all drugs that might be administered?
Good question. We pretty much set a cutoff in terms of the lower value. You have things like maybe a nitroglycerin packet or something that may be only worth 4 or 5 cents. It may not be worth the time and labor to tag and track and program that drug, given the ROI on the utilization of that. So we had more so of a cutoff on the lower end cost wise, but anything probably more than $1 or up, we were pretty much tagging and tracking just from an efficiency perspective. So definitely probably comes in handy even more when you're looking at high cost or high value drugs, things that are used in a procedural setting as well to give you more visibility there. But you don't want to be wasting your time, quote unquote, tagging things that are low in value, so to speak. So that was kind of our threshold for cutoff.
Yeah, okay, good. And Ruby, for your home care kits, again, is there a cutoff value on that, or is it everything that's in the kit? Since it's at home, it's got a more higher risk factor, I suppose.
Correct, yeah. So there's no cutoff there in terms of cost. So we actually do have Tylenol tablets and other various drugs that we typically would not want to be spending the time and labor to tag. But just given the unique care model of the hospital at home and making sure our patients do have the medications they need at that time, the patient need is really what drives that for us.
Okay. David, you're up. So in terms of use cases from St. Jude's that you could share with us?
Sure. So I'll cover this from past, present, and future. So prior to coming to St. Jude, was involved in implementing the concept of kits and trays that Ruby and Tony have spoken to. And in that scenario, the focus was really on emergency management carts and kits that supported those areas. That's really the traditional use case in pharmacy. When I first came to St. Jude, one of the is mentioning vendors okay, or are we vendor agnostic?
Vendor agnostic, yeah.
Okay, that's what I wanted to be sure. So we partnered with a health record vendor and a medication tracking group when I first came to St. Jude, and we actually developed an interface where when a patient-specific medication was going out of one of our buildings into another building, we would update the location in the tracking system for the nurse so that we could see that the medication had been received at the unit, and the nurse could see. Later, we actually later modified that so that the system itself, when you tried to send a medication to a place that it couldn't, it would stop you and say, you as a human must go and take this medication in a specific way to a specific place. Think antibiotics that are needed immediately, chemotherapy that shouldn't go through a tube system, medications that need to be treated specific ways. And so then recently we're working with another vendor and our current health record vendor to track our blood factor products. And so we've just implemented what's called the hematologic clotting factor pharmacy. So we're a pharmacy within a home infusion pharmacy. So a specific type of care in a specific setting, really expensive products that need to be treated very carefully. And on top of the regular information that we might hear about in the Q&A, like lot and expiration, these products, it's not like getting a 50 milligram product. They have specific doses, like a 1,000 or a 1 gram dose may actually be 950 units or 957 units. So they need to be tracked very specifically. And so we're actually using GS1 standards and leveraging the potency field and sending that across an interface and visualizing it for our pharmacist when they verify orders so that they're not walking across a warehouse and looking at multiple products and saying, this is 956 and this is 1,020, and together they make this, because we as humans we're one, not built to do that, and two, there are much better uses for our time. But if you look across pharmacy in the United States and frankly the world, you'll see that's happening more than you realize. And so we're very hopeful that this is a first step. We want to get to the point where the health record, rather than the pharmacist having to choose the product, the health record should choose the product, and then a pharmacy technician, a helper, should be able to grab it and say, this is what I made, and have someone check that on the back end. So this is an evolution. And then future state, one of the larger inventory management vendors is making their anesthesia workstations, their anesthesia carts backwards compatible. And so, or I should say, they're introducing a solution where we can take pre-tagged anesthesia-based products, and we're really excited. I'm going to say my partner is a CRNA, whereas a nurse anesthetist, and so we talk about this a lot. The ability to have pre-tagged products that come in the door and go straight to the cab or go straight to the anesthesia workstation with minimal intervention. That means increased safety, increased visibility, increased oversight. And I mentioned these last two together because, by golly, when I encode a tag in one system as a pharmacist, I darn well be better to use it in another system, because the whole darn thing falls apart if these different systems only allow me to tag and use in one system. And that's where the interoperability comes into play. And I think we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, we recently saw on another webinar an interesting use case, which is relevant to the areas that you talked about in terms of resources, labor, and cost. It was around the management of particularly expensive drugs in the pharmacy, and they have to be mixed at a certain time, and keeping track of what's being mixed, and if it's coming to the end of its life, using that information that's available to be read remotely to actually ship the medication to another hospital who may be able to use it if they're not going to make use of it in their own hospital. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there around the accurate and timely use of medication as well.
Well done.
So let's take a look now, since all of you have been involved in implementing RAIN RFID. Let's take a look at what the challenges you've experienced, and I know which one of them is going to come up here. It's come up twice already. Ruby, if you take a look at it from your workflow and resources and the processes involved in implementing the technology for your home care solution, I'd like to hear what your challenges have been.
Absolutely. So our hospital is responsible for, or our pharmacy department is responsible for servicing 3 inpatient hospital bed towers, which include a level 1 trauma center, a cancer center, a children's hospital, among other specialty areas in medicine. We also cover a psych rehab facility, 2 offsite EDs, 1 micro hospital, offsite surgical centers, and of course our hospital at home program. So we're covering a lot of patients. We are delivering and preparing a lot of medication and covering a large area. So our biggest challenge is fitting the time in our workflow with our limited labor resources. And so making sure that we aren't falling behind and making sure that we are adequately managing inventory for both drugs and our RFID tags. That's been a huge challenge, and fitting the time to make sure that tags are being encoded properly with accurate information, and having the pharmacist check back and make sure that the tags are accurately being encoded. And so all of that is a big challenge. And then whether it's drug shortages, whether it's tag shortages, or just our inability to keep up, sometimes that happens as well. And so given our large area of coverage for these medications, making sure that we have what we need and including the time to do what we need to do is a huge challenge for us. And of course, there are certain times of the year that pose to be more difficult. I would say the end of the month specifically, when drugs tend to expire. So that always comes to be a challenge for us, just increasing the volume of kits and trays and everything that needs to be replenished at that time when things are expiring.
So you do all the tagging of the kits and medication yourself? Not you personally, but your staff do this?
Yes, correct. So all of our tagging at this time is done manually. And so we do have to set aside time in the workflow for both our pharmacy technicians as well as our pharmacists.
And do you encode the tags locally, or do you bring tags in that are already encoded?
We encode them manually as well with our specific vendor, yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Anthony, on to you. Ensuring medication safety and the policies and procedures around the safety. What has been your challenges in implementing RAIN RFID?
Yeah, I think I would, resonate a lot with what Ruby said there in terms of managing those logistics and other challenges. I think this is why a lot of us have been bigger advocates and supporting more distributors or pharmaceutical manufacturers to support being able to embed and tag and things in their products before it gets to the distribution or the wholesalers, because that reduces a lot of additional work and safety steps that has to happen at the department level. But I think that's something we probably can take for granted and need to be more focused on from a medication safety perspective. With us, we have to segregate inventory. So if we're getting things that are being tagged, you don't want to tag things that are not going to be used within RFID capable areas or RFID capable patient care units. So you've got to think about the aspect of segregation of inventory, putting in tag things in one place and non-tag things in another place. Depending on your state or what's happening from an operational perspective, you need to have a second check for any tag or programming. Similar to Ruby, all of our tags were placed and added on each device or each medication, NDC, and unit dosed item manually. And so you can pretty much bulk program them, and that includes all of your specific medication information. But, if you grab the wrong vial and program it under the wrong drug, and that's accidentally checked by the third party who's going to be verifying that work of the technician or some ancillary support staff, it's hard to really go back and correct that or catch that on the back end. So from a safety perspective, really being specific about making sure drug names match up, making sure concentrations match up. We use barcode scanning to try to pre-fill in a lot of fields prior to tagging. So that helps, minimize some of those safety risks. But it's very important to provide due diligence and ensure that that application of the tag and then the coding process is done correctly. You'll be surprised. You batch and tag a pack of 100 vials, and 2 of them may be missing a tag, or one of them may not have read, so it didn't program it correctly. So the machine is reading 99 instead of 100. So there's a lot of different logistical things that you have to be mindful of from a safety perspective to ensure that all those downstream and theoretical benefits are actually being realized. And so I think that a lot of that comes down to policies and procedures, second checks. I know some states in the US now have tech programs and things like that. So you can kind of get a little bit creative in terms of who's doing the programming, who's doing the verifications. We always say just make sure it passes the eye test. So even if after something is programmed and checked on the safety end, just make sure the tag's on there, keep an eye out for it, make sure there's no loose tags laying around in the tray, things like that, just to kind of do a little bit more due diligence to ensure some of those safety steps are in place. But, I think we don't want to propose it as, once you get FRD, your medication safety and error risk goes to 0. There's still a chance for error, but there's just a different type of errors and who can make those errors and where that can occur in the workflow throughout the process. So you have to be very mindful from a administrative perspective to ensure that you've got the right checks and balances in place to help mitigate some of those risks and pitfalls.
Okay. Maybe I misunderstood you, but I think I understood you to say there that you have, for instance, one drug might come in and be tagged for use in one part of the hospital that's RFID enabled, but the same drug may have to be tracked elsewhere and where it's not RFID enabled. So you still have to run 2 sets of processes in parallel.
We do, yeah. I think for us, the ROI as well too, given the cost of the tags and the labor associated with that, we didn't want to tag things and then have it be used in the area where it's not going to be utilized with the RFID readers and the tracking systems from an analytics perspective. So a lot of the inventory segregation is done up front, just so that once the drug gets to its final location, pharmacy-wise, where it is going to be tagged, you're confident that that drug is going to be used in the appropriate location and appropriate kind of patient care setting. But that is important, especially for operations where you're doing things maybe not within a satellite pharmacy or an offsite pharmacy, but within your main pharmacy. You want to make sure that tagged inventory is being used under the current channels and the correct supply chain channels versus non-tagged inventory, because that can get pretty cost prohibitive to be using them and tagging them where areas where it's not going to be used.
Okay. So I'm hearing so far two core issues. One is the where the drugs are tagged, and ideally you'd like to have them source tagged. I know, and the other then is outside of RAIN RFID, but it's an important part of the RAIN RFID project. It's the processes that support the whole implementation to make sure that even if something does go wrong, it's caught. So it needs involving a lot of stakeholders involved in that. David, what would you ask to add to this in terms of IT and information systems and issues from your perspective, a technical perspective, if you like, on implementing RAIN RFID?
So first, I think that what Tony has pointed out really is the thesis of traditional implementation of RFID from an inventory management perspective, the safety component and the inventory management component. I will add that, so if you're a tag vendor that's tuning in, and you're considering working with a manufacturer or a wholesaler, one of the lessons that we've sent to you is, or that we want to instill into you, is that the further from the point of care we can tag, the more we can leverage economy of scale. The context of Tony's point about segregating inventory is also important as those strategies start to materialize, because having clear forecasted inventory needs is going to be important to assure that we're not over ordering. If a manufacturer is going to run a line, or a wholesaler is going to run a retagging service, then we need to make sure that while we can choose to take a product that doesn't have a tag and then instill a tag closer to the point of care in the field, to use a product that has a tag when the tag wasn't needed is wasteful. And so if we do that too often, then that eats into that eats into the story that we tell on the pharmacy side. And I think that's going to become more important over the next 1 to 2 years as we start to see, those between the point of care pharmacy and the health system and the manufacturer starting to assist with bridging that gap in products that have a tag. Because when I want to put products in that anesthesia drawer, they're not all going to be available from the manufacturer pre-tagged. Unless you're a manufacturer and you're listening in, please consider offering that option. Just throwing it out there. We all want that in pharmacy. So I'd add in response to your question, workflow development and buy-in is key. So if I'm going to be, if I'm going to be using those kits with tags, so something new is going to appear in a procedural area in a patient's home, to the earlier points, I need to make sure that I'm communicating and over communicating what that is. That will always spark questions and can impact buy-in. I think communicating with IT asset management is it's not necessarily hard, but it's really important, because in the companies that we serve, they're used to thinking of asset management, of tagging as I'm tagging a pump or a wheelchair, and devices that are not consumed. If you're a tag manufacturer, you probably already know this, but so that I say it, the use cases in the pharmacy are drastically different than the traditional use cases in asset management, because we're consuming that tag with the consumption of the medication. So that tag lives to die. It's not like a pneumatic tube that I mentioned in an earlier example, where we had one passive RFID tag in a tube for years at a time. The other thing that I want to point out is that the quality of tags. So, that's not an IT problem until the tags start falling off the vials, and it very quickly becomes a help ticket. So the very first implementation I was involved in years ago, we had a new batch of tags, and part of that process is you're mass tagging products in preparation for deployment. And so we had our quarantined area, so we had a room and all the products, and we were about 2/3 through tagging, about 5 of us, hours and hours in, and someone said the tag is coming off of the vial, and my heart stopped. So that's really important from a deployment perspective. If you're a manufacturer using quality adhesive, knowing that you're QAing your tags, this seems like basic stuff, but it's also like that happened in real life. We had to stop and replan around a project.
Yeah. Okay. Good input. Both of you are singing, or all three of you are singing my tune, because we have a project management primer course that we offer, which covers this idea of getting intimately into the process flow within the end user, but also getting to know all the key stakeholders. And one of the key questions that people have asked me is from a healthcare perspective, who is the customer in the pharmacy, and what other stakeholders do they need to involve? So maybe if we could take a look at that, from a point of view of a company coming to work, solutions provider coming to work with a hospital, who are the key stakeholders that they need to? It's obviously going to depend on the project, but an idea of the kind of key stakeholders they should involve. So Ruby, would you care to take that one from your pharmacy personnel being involved in RFID project and implementation? What are their specific roles, and who is the buyer from your perspective in the projects you've been on?
Do you mean like implementing RFID at our institution?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. So the leaders in our department, director, assistant director, as well as at the coordinator level, these decisions were made before I was in my role, but key stakeholders do include our pharmacy leaders as well as our supply chain leaders. And multiple departments were involved in this decision-making process. As far as like end users too, aside from our pharmacy technicians and our pharmacists, our nurses are also big end users. They're the ones administering these medications to these patients. And so the tags don't really play into their workflow, but they are managing these medications and tampering with these medications. And so the nurses are kind of like an end user that no one really thinks about. But from the pharmacy perspective, as far as like the decision making, when hospital at home, when we decided to implement that program at our institution, one of the first ideas we came up with was like, okay, maybe we can use RFID technology for hospital at home, because we knew we had to equip our nurses with emergency medications, and we thought that using RFID technology would be the most efficient way to do so. There was some front end preparation that we needed to work through as far as like what additional medications do we now need to start thinking about as far as tagging goes and programming them into our system, our RFID machine. So once all of that decision making was done, all of that planning, it was a pretty seamless process as far as like expanding our use of our RFID.
Okay. Anthony, can you add to that from the pharmacy perspective and the personnel involved in purchasing decisions and how decisions are made?
Yeah, I think Ruby hit a lot of those key stakeholders there in terms of integration and making sure that everyone's on the same page. I think lessons learned from me from an administrative perspective was just make sure not just your critical stakeholders are aware of decision making, but also just the team members who need to be aware just from kind of an FYI perspective are roped into. So obviously a lot of the decision makers to deploy the solution and engage with the solution really came from our senior pharmacy leadership. At the time I was an operational manager and assistant director level. And so I kind of led the forefront in terms of putting together ROI and the proposal and engaging with the vendors, doing the RFPs and ensuring that we kind of did our due diligence to look at what was out there and what solution worked best for us and why. Physicians, given that we did a lot of deployment within the procedural areas, where most organizations are very physician driven. So you got to make sure that they're on the same page and they have buy-in, especially when you're talking about surgeons and anesthesiologists and groups that generally don't get told no too often in terms of what they want and don't want. So having them as an advocate in your side and on board really goes a long way to support a successful deployment and engagement. My wife is a nurse, so I have to always be remembering of not leaving out our nursing partners and colleagues. So mostly on the procedural side, the OR nurses and things like that, but they're going to be handling a lot of the medications, passing things through the sterile field, et cetera. So having them aware and just understanding what the technology is and how it's going to be used is definitely important from that perspective. We have to engage our anesthesia techs. They handle a lot of the used kits and trays and do some of the logistics back and forth from the storage locations. So they were a pretty big stakeholder to just engage and make aware of. The vendor that we chose actually had more of a web-based solution in terms of the setup and integration with the EHR and the hardware itself and their data analytics platform. So our IT and IS folks were really kind of the rate limiting step for us to just ensure that all the safety and cybersecurity and other kind of system checks were in place. There were no security threats from the vendor. They did all the setup and IP accesses and all the LAN connections and all those good IT things that I never learned about in pharmacy school, but had to get well versed on pretty quickly. They were a big part of a successful deployment and ensuring that things were working well on both sides, not just on the hospital side, but what was going on the vendor side as well. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention kind of the ITIS informatics folks that are kind of key to some of that engagement and deployment as well. So we engage some of our senior financial leaders more so from an awareness perspective. I'm always of the mantra, if you can tell a good story, it sells a product even better. So we had success stories or we had good outcomes or things that we felt like led to some good cost savings or hard dollar ROI. We would share those stories with our financial leaders just so that they had awareness and give a little bit of kudos to pharmacy as well. So win-win there, but those are probably some of the primary groups on our end.
Okay, good input. We've kind of covered the next topic a little bit a few times, but I think it might be useful. This is the idea of pre-tagging the items, and we certainly talked about the GS1 standards, and we've talked about the cost advantages. But Ruby, would you take a stab at explaining what sort of manual process is that needs to be replaced, and why it's so costly for hospitals for pre-tagging? Sorry, for tagging yourself. Sorry, for tagging the medication yourself, not putting the tag on yourself.
So part of the process includes having to order the tags themselves, in addition to ordering the medication that you need to be tagging. So that's kind of like two different ordering processes, and then making sure that you have staff to receive that order and physically affix the tag to each product, each individual vial or each individual injection or whatever it is that you're tagging. That includes adequate review of the lot number of each product, the expiration date of each product. This information is very important to make sure that you are programming correctly, to make sure that in the event of a recall or anything like that, this information has to be accurate. And so that includes involving two sets of eyes to verify that information. So for us, we use a technician to do the initial encoding of the tag. And then we have a pharmacist to go back and verify that, that information. And so when we're tagging boxes of different sets of 50 count boxes of different vials or injections, Bristojex or what have you, it ends up being a lot. It ends up being a lot of just like repetitive tagging, repetitive reviewing of counting the medications and making sure you've got the lot numbers aren't mixed up. And so it just ends up being sort of a time-consuming process for us. And so in that sense, having pre-tagged items would save us so much time. It would allow us to deploy kits and trays at a much faster rate. It would also just prevent any sort of safety issues. For example, if the expiration date is incorrectly encoded, or if the medication is encoded as something that is really not, you know, it's very easy to make a mistake in medicine, and that's why we usually try to have two sets of eyes look at something before we deploy it to patients. Another thing is right now, especially with our hospital at home use case, tablets and capsules are a little bit challenging to manually tag without covering the barcode that needs to be scanned, or you know, without making it too difficult for the nurse to actually open the medication. So the time it takes to really look at a product and decide where is the best place I can put this tag, it's not something anyone talks about, and it's not something anyone really considers as like a time-consuming factor, but it does play a role, at least for us, especially when we're dealing with these tiny little vials or these tiny little tablets and trying to figure out where the best place is to put this RFID tag. So there is a lot of time involved in the pre-tagging process for us.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to go back to David to pick up on something that Anthony just mentioned a minute ago, which is around data and cybersecurity. What are the risks of data and cybersecurity issues of having medication tagged both in the hospital and in you know, going to people's houses and stuff like that?
So I think the biggest risk is, you know, frankly, the number of access points and cloud-based solutions. And so the tags themselves, I don't consider to be a risk personally. Others may disagree with me, and I welcome that feedback. But it's the solutions and the point of care, or pardon me, and the point of scanning that offer opportunities for intrusion. I mean, each of those is a potential vulnerability that needs to be kept up, that needs to be assessed, that either your centralized or decentralized IS group needs to be aware of and to help keep up to date. If someone is reading a tag at home and they're connected externally to the network, is that connection secured? Are they connected to a cloud device? Is that cloud device or is that cloud solution secured? So really, the more you scale it, the more vulnerabilities you have. Those are the biggest cybersecurity risks from my perspective. Theoretically, someone could impact a large batch of products that were encoded at once, but I would expect quality assurance to pick that up before a product leaves a facility. So I think it's more on the software that reads the tags than anything else from my perspective. But if I missed something there, please say it in the Q&A because I would love feedback.
Anthony or Ruby, do you have a view on that?
I agree with that assessment. I mean, I think very low risk on the tag side, especially if you're looking at challenges with PHI or cybersecurity threats. I agree with that assessment there. Those are pretty benign, but in terms of the platforms, and especially if you're setting up any kind of interface with the EHR or any kind of other third-party system that you're using within your organization, I think that's probably where the biggest risk and threats lie. So I think David's spot on there.
I would add to that. So for those of us or some of us may remember years ago when there was an army base out in the Middle East where the soldiers were wearing Fitbits, and it was a secret base, and there was all this activity on the Fitbits. It was kind of a to-do in the news years ago. I can see a scenario like that causing a faux pas with RFID tags and the systems that are supporting them being used out in the community. I think that's probably the biggest type of risk that's out there. Beyond that, it's no different than other solutions.
Okay, let's take a peek into the future because we're coming to the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Ruby, back to you again. Your wish list in terms of untapped areas where you believe RFID could deliver significant value for your part of the business.
Let's see, my wish list, definitely just full inventory management. I mean, fluids, controlled substances, things that we're currently not really using RFID for, at least at our institution. But a big thing also is any sort of technology that could allow us to know when a medication is damaged or tampered with or otherwise unusable. Because right now our RFID tags do not tell us that information. And so oftentimes it's after the fact, after the product has been sent over to the patient, that we're finding out that it's not usable. And so if there was any sort of technology out there that could allow us to know that ahead of time, that would be really nice for our institution, especially bringing medications to patient homes. That's always kind of a challenge. And so making sure that everything is intact. And that's sort of, again, using technology to free up time for the pharmacist and the nurse and everyone involved. So I would say full inventory management, and then being able to detect damaged product would be awesome.
Okay. Anthony, your perspective on the future of RFID within RAIN RFID within the medical pharmacies. Excuse me, my throat is stuck. Within the pharmacy in hospitals.
Yeah, I mean, I think the use case or analyst, I think this is probably the most promising area of discussion, and hope that we can kind of see some progress sooner rather than later in terms of more development and kind of getting beyond some of the current use cases to catch up with some other industries outside of healthcare. I think initially it's probably going to start mostly with the management of high value therapies and high cost therapies. So I think that expands use into not just the more acute care areas, but ambulatory care areas and in-office administrations and locations where, high dollar medications, specialty drugs, cell and gene therapies, et cetera, can be managed and, reviewed and tracked in real time and get a better visibility in terms of performance there from an organizational perspective. I think that's pretty clear use case. The readers, I think right now, a lot of our utilization of RFID, especially for the medication side, a lot of our readers are very small, concentrated devices or boxes that are kind of located within specific locations. And so it's not as much of an ability to have more of a passive reading of the tags than the asset location specifically versus having it being more active and more concentrated. We used to call our reader that we did our programming and our tracking and scanning in as the microwave box, but having more room specific tag tracking or more room specific reads or location specific reading like we see with some of the high value supplies or high value assets that are managed on the hospital side would be very beneficial for pharmacies and other kind of medication distribution operations to support not just utilization, but better engagement and visibility and less kind of labor related driven analytics in terms of locations and other pertinent information from a medication perspective. I know David mentioned artificial intelligence, but I think there's a lot of future integration and development opportunities there with AI and RFID. Pattern utilization, supply shortages. Ruby talked a lot about supply chain and storage conditions. I think, if there's more tagged medications that are pre-tagged throughout the supply chain process, more engagement from some of the larger manufacturers and distributors there, and more expansive use, to give us a really good foundational tool set of data that we can use to make real-time decision making, understand distribution dynamics, support some of the initiatives around DSCSA and making sure that drugs are coming from authentic locations within the supply chain. There's a lot of opportunities around diversion for controlled substances and better visibility and oversight for medications. Even with integration opportunities, we use automated dispensing cabinets quite a bit in our patient care locations. If those kind of machines can read RFID tags more passively and give us better visibility into where we have things stored in a decentralized capacity, I just think that helps us with visibility, safety, and more advanced operational efficiencies related to the distribution of medications and, even potentially supplies within the pharmacy chain as well for sterile compounding operations or oral unit dose kits, things like that, things that are maybe not high value, but high throughput, high utilization. RFID applications can support that. We've seen demonstrations and discussions about RFID being embedded into, biometric readers and patient-specific data as well. So, that has a lot of applications for remote care and telehealth and more patient-specific impacts that can help pharmacy from a clinical perspective to get a better sense of what patients are doing and how they're responding to things and what's happening from a care perspective on the multidisciplinary side. So, I think a lot of those future state opportunities are endless. I think it's going to require a lot of partnerships and not just vendor engagement, but use cases and real world evidence collection to show that value so that we can see expansive utilization, especially on the acute care side. But I think those are some things that we can look forward to and hopefully see some expansive opportunities in the near future.
Interesting list with wide open, expansive list of things there. In the interest of time, I just want to take one last question with David, and that's around the idea of RAIN RFID readers in smartphones. We know this is on the horizon. We just don't know exactly where the horizon is. We believe it's going to be very, very soon. But when that happens, obviously, then the patients will have the ability to scan the drugs or scan the medical devices, etc. So, David, if you have any thoughts on how this change in the industry would be used by hospitals?
I spent a bit of time thinking about this, and I think that this is me postulating, I think that we are going to see that we're going to rely on and partner with our tag vendors in the next 1 to 3 years to design tags that meet more specific needs for pharmacy. I'm thinking I have a IV compound, or I've got a sterile compounding hood, or I have a point of care solution, a place where I'm going to be seeing a patient and administering a product. So I've got a vial and I need to break the tag when the vial is opened. That's important. There are a number of ways that could be useful when we think about getting the product closer to the point of care, assuming it's pre-tagged. So you asked about scanners and smartphones. So what does it look like to have a unit dose product? So a product that's ready to be dispensed with a tag that is going to, that's going to exist on that tablet and also easily be broken when the product gets to the point of care. If the product is scanned by either a nurse with their institution deployed smartphone or the patient at home, what does it look like for a product that is being sent into the home to have a tag that actually in some way, shape, or form starts to degrade. So I imagine a world where when the product has actually expired or we don't want it used after a specific time, there's a part of that tag that snaps and either the frequency changes or it stops to function, so that when the end user goes to scan that product or goes to scan that tag with with their smartphone, it alerts them. Not good.
Okay. No, nice one. Okay, in the interest of time here, I'm going to turn over to my colleague Elizabeth. Do we have any questions from the attendees?
Yes, we have gotten a few. The first question we have from one attendee is how to deal with expiration dates.
Jump in
Lee,
there.
you
So
got
for most of our tag programming and utilization, we actually were able to program the expiration date into the tag when we were doing the programming at the point of application. So that's a pretty comprehensive field that I think is pretty consistent across all vendors now in terms of the drug input information, in terms of the lot number and the expiration date. But that's some of the core medication specific details at the NDC level that we were able to program into the tag. And that also supports a lot of tracking and waste reductions because you can run reports to see what's going to expire within the next 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And you can proactively pull that stock and rotate that stock and avoid some of those expirations that are kind of in circulation from a safety perspective. So hopefully that answered the question, but that's how we manage expiration dates through our RFID tagging.
Next question, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Do you feel being able to monitor and capture temperature and humidity sensor abilities in your RFID tags would be of benefit? Are insulin, plasma, and some drugs sensitive to humidity and temperature?
I guess I can take this one. Would definitely benefit, I think, especially for some of like tablet products or anything that does degrade in humidity or moisture. Being able to know that that product is no longer usable would be helpful for us. We, at this moment, we do not use, we don't tag insulin products or plasma or anything like that, but I do feel that if there's a way to gauge stability and integrity of the product, that would be super beneficial for not just pharmacy, but for providers and supply chain as well. I think David wanted to add a little bit to that as well.
Sure. I mean, I think that's very well said. So we're clinicians, so we're not super familiar with all parts of the RAIN standard. But doesn't doesn't RAIN 2.0 allow for tracking of temperature and humidity? I want to say Ohio State was doing a pilot around. I think they were actually keeping track of the temperature of some of the food that they were delivering in their mess hall or in their cafeteria. Pardon me. And so I think that's a great use case, to go to the question that's being asked. Yeah, I mean, being able to track the pedigree of the product and to know if it exceeded its temperature or it had a temperature excursion or exceeded the way that it should be stored, and combine that with Drug Supply Chain Security Act. So a system to tell us where something that's been moved either before it got to our loading dock or within our facility as we get to the point of care, that insulin, to Ruby's point, has been stored in 90-degree heat for 3 hours and exceeded the temperature. I don't want to give that to a patient, but today that could happen.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Elizabeth?
Yes, the next one goes to you, David. In reference to your comment, I better be able to use a tagged item in all RAIN tracking systems in the hospital. Do you support the practice of encoding open, interoperable GS1 numbers on RAIN tags applied at the source of medication manufacturers?
So there are, without diving too deep into what I do know of GS1 standards, if there are two methods to encode those standards using the API or going the long route, if you will, I do support midfield tagging of GS1 or GS1 standards on all products in the field. And I've pushed the vendor we're working with. Push is a strong word. They were like, yeah, that's a great idea. And so we're using GS1 standards midfield. And my intent is to take one of our tags here in the next couple of weeks and to send it off to another vendor and be like, you can read this, right? So to answer your question, yes, I support that. If I didn't answer the question you were looking for, please re-ask.
David, could you explain the term midfield?
Yeah, so think of manufacturer, wholesaler at the or then within the pharmacy. And so in the field itself, applying the GS1 standards, not having it done at the manufacturer. And I think that's going to be important for wholesalers like Cardinal and different wholesalers that want to offer a tagging service to bridge those gaps in the future.
Okay. Thank you. Elizabeth, are we more?
Yes, I just wanted to follow up if Ruby and Anthony, the attendee kind of asked if the same question to either of you, if you have anything else to add.
No, I agree with David. I think from an advocacy perspective and kind of supporting that from a distribution side, I think we're seeing a lot more wholesalers are probably engaging in kind of being the middleman to support some of that as well due to customer demand. But, I think long term, that's going to set us up for success, and looking for some of those changes in the future are really going to, support not just successful operational logistics, but also helping us grow and meet some of those needs that we tend to kind of struggle with current day, especially with that, midfield representation and partnership there. So I second David 100% on that.
Thank you. Just one final question. So seems like source tagging would alleviate part of the cost and reduce errors. How to promote source tagging? Do distributors like Cardinal Health have leverage on MFRS, or could distribution centers do tagging?
Well, I hope webinars help. I think we have to ask for it.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, these kind of platforms really can initiate and kickstart those conversations. I think there's customer demand across the country, and just kind of seeing some engagement with some of our hospitals and the team members that we work with on my side, and just looking at future state cases. I think stating that case and establishing the ROI and actually just promoting some of those solutions and just kind of seeing what's out there. I think the supply chain folks have done a really good job of making some visibility pretty open and obvious there and growing some expansions. But from a promotion perspective, I feel like we're a little bit behind the 8 ball on the pharmacy and medication distribution side. And, I want to say pressure, but engaging and partnering with manufacturers to understand the use case, create a demand for products that are going to be pre-tagged or tagged prior to being received on the customer side. Really helps establish that ROI. Hopefully long term that can drive down costs, as David mentioned, from an economies of scale perspective. If you got more and more customers utilizing it, more and more customers expecting RFID tag products be coming into their supply chains, and being able to scale that from a cost perspective, if that's a concern from them, I think that supports the greater good from a long-term perspective as well. So really creating that pressure, having open and honest discussions about it, creating that demand, really supporting RFID use and solutions and discussions and sharing success stories really helps with that foundation. And putting a little bit of pressure on your suppliers never really hurt to make that case. But it really starts upstream to me with the manufacturers, and then the distributors and wholesalers can kind of support what we see from a growth perspective with manufacturers. And then I think that all kind of sets the foundation and makes sure customers are getting what they need on the back end.
I would agree with that. And just to point out that like the first step to vocalizing our need for pre-tagged items would be increasing our use of RFID technology across the board, different institutions, different departments within healthcare. So the more we are using RFID technology, the greater need arises for pre-tagged items. And so that would be the first step. I would agree with Tony.
That was the last question, Elizabeth.
Yes, it looks like it is, and we've reached right at the top of the hour. So thank you
Okay,
all
great.
for joining us today.
I just have one thing I want to finish with, if I may. First of all, to thank our presenters here today, our panelists today. It was excellent discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you all the attendees. I just wanted to draw your attention to, we have our Rain in Action Summit coming up in September, which is the 23rd to the 25th or 26th, I can't remember. And the very first day of that, there is a one-day healthcare workshop, which goes sort of a deep dive into implementing RAIN in the healthcare market. And it's delivered by our members who have been working in this market. So it's a very extensive deep dive into healthcare, which is on the very first day. And then there are there's a healthcare track also on the conference itself. Last thing I would like to say is that there's been some discussion here about the use of sensor tags. If you go to our website and look at a recent blog post from I think it's less than a month ago, it goes into some detail on using rain sensor tags for detecting temperature and moisture in blister packs and things like that. So it lays out an argument there. So it's interesting to go have a look at that if you're interested in that area. I'll hand back to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, George. Yes, just want to say a final thank you to our panelists. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, you can reach out to operations at the RAIN Alliance email. This webinar will be available on our website following the close. So thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, guys.